For the introduction. So good morning, everybody. It's nice to have you all this morning to exchange for the next 15 minutes about GAIA-X, also and what's in it for you. So let's quickly move to today's agenda. Next slide, please. So first of all, I'll go through the context around the birth of GAIA-X and how we got there. And then I'll try to give you a quick overview on what is GAIA-X for those who are new with the concept of GAIA-X, and I'll explain how it can answer the challenges implied by the context. During the third chapter, I will cover how GAIA-X might be interesting for you and for our economy. And finally, I'll mention what has been organized here in Luxembourg to support the GAIA-X initiative. Next slide, please. So how did we get there? We are in July 2016, and the privacy shield had been put in place. So what does that mean? Europe considered that the American regulations offered the same protection level than the European regulation regarding the protection of personal data. So provided that you follow the EU legal framework, you were allowed to transfer personal data to the US. Second step, it had been adopted in April 2016, but we are now in May 2018, and the General Data Protection Regulation is now officially applicable. It had a huge impact on the collection of data, its storage, and its processing. But it's also important to keep in mind that wherever in the world the data are stored, as long as it is data about European citizens, then GDPR is applicable. But 2 months before the application of the GDPR, so in March 2018, the American administration decides that they have the right to ask for criminal investigations every data belonging to American companies, even if those data are stored outside of their territory. Moreover, they don't have to ask to the local competent authorities to do this. So this is what is called the Cloud Act. And as you can imagine, this made a lot of noise in Europe. And then there was Mr. Schrems, who filed a lawsuit against Facebook. It lasted for years, but one of the outcomes of this is that in July 2020, the European Court of Justice judged that the privacy shield has to be invalidated. Since then, it is forbidden to send personal data of European citizens outside of Europe if you don't respect very strict conditions that are defined in some articles of the GDPR. If you want to have a look, the European Data Protection Board published in June this year some recommendations regarding the export of data outside of Europe. And for your information, the European Commission has recognized a list of 12 countries as providing adequate protection, among which you find Switzerland, Canada, Israel, Japan, and UK. So there is a strong need to move to European clouds that ensures the sovereignty, security, and to build those clouds. And don't forget that we need to keep the control on our data and our infrastructure in order to keep our sovereignty and autonomy. Today, everything that is required for an economy to work can be weaponized. Yesterday it was Huawei, tomorrow the EU might be the target. So this is in this context that GAIA-X has been created in order to work in a secure, sovereign, and open ecosystem built on European values. Next slide, please. So GAIA-X has been presented for the first time to the general public in 2019 and officially launched on 4th of June 2020. So we can still consider that it's like a baby. During her State of the Union, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned GAIA-X, as she said, that we will build a European cloud as part of next generation EU based on GAIA-X. And the word based makes all the difference, as GAIA-X won't be a cloud, but a set of frameworks, standards, and rules. Next slide, please. So we have seen how important it is to use European clouds, but another big issue is the lock-in effect. Some well-known platforms providers provide solutions so that it is very difficult or expensive to leave them. So the idea behind GAIA-X is that the clouds follow the same standards and are interoperable between each other. By doing this, the customer can change from one cloud to another without too many difficulties and at a reduced cost. Next slide, please. The idea is thus, and that was the title of the speech today, the idea is thus to move from one solution where the user led the control, where it's a concentrated, proprietary, opaque solution, to a solution where it keeps the control. This is to have a federated ecosystem containing different entities like clouds and services compatible with each other as they follow standards, frameworks, and rules that are clearly and openly defined. And that is where, for us, GAIA-X will act by defining those standards, framework, and rules. And by following those standards, we will ensure that data and services are portable. GAIA-X also insists on the openness. The documentation and specifications will be available for each one of us. And finally, they recommend to work under open source licenses. Next slide, please. So this is the famous X we already saw in some presentation before. I'll keep it short and high level. You can see three parts. The bottom one is related to the infrastructure. This infrastructure has to be compliant with the EU legal framework. And we, of course, see the ideas of interoperability, portability, and interconnectivity. The upper part is related to the data and the goal to create data spaces specific to the different sectors, but they have also to be interoperable between each other. And it's not mentioned on this graph, but in order to be able to share data with others, there is a crucial need to have a good data governance. And finally, the federated services in the center with the federated catalog, a block for the authentication and identity management, some services that will allow a sovereign data exchange, and finally, the compliance and its mechanisms that will ensure that the rules are respected. Next slide, please. So GAIA-X is not something from a supreme divinity. We have actors behind it. At the international level, we have the AISBL, which is the core of the organizational structure of GAIA-X, and also the vertical working groups, where different companies and entities gather to find solutions to challenges that are specific to their sector. Then at national level, you can find Hub, which acts as point of contact between all local actors and the AISBL. They're also there to help to find synergies with other actors at national and international level. And then you have the members of the AISBL and the participants. To take part in the vertical working groups, you don't need to be a member of the AISBL, and you are then considered as a participant. Next slide, please. So this is kind of slide which summarize what are the roles and responsibilities. So you see the different entities I mentioned before. And the vertical working groups, they will work on projects and they will produce requirements. Those requirements should flow to the AISBL, and then the AISBL will disseminate and unify the requirements to form standard proposals, which will be the basis of a conformity label. Next slide, please. So, what's in it for you and for our economy? I see different roles. The first one is for any infrastructure and service providers. Those companies might want to make their products and services GAIA-X compliant and provide their services or products to a broad mass of GAIA-X stakeholders. For example, if I'm storing my data on a cloud A, which is GAIA-X compliant, and I want to move to a cloud B, which is also GAIA-X compliant, but I want to be able to move also the services I'm using. If both clouds are GAIA-X compliant, I'm quite sure that I will be able to do it without any problems. And then on the other side, you have all companies have data somewhere or need data. We have seen with the COVID-19 how difficult it was sometimes to make the data available to employees who were working from home. In the precipitation, maybe that some companies chose solutions which are not compliant with the EU regulation. By using GAIA-X compliant solution, you can be sure that you follow those rules. There might also, of course, be a need to share your data for the different reasons as listed here, in order to define new business, to define new products. And I would add that it is even more important due to the size of Luxembourg. Our small size implies sometimes that the set of data in research, for example, are non-representative, and they might need to get other data before performing their study. Next slide, please. So what about Luxembourg? In March of this year, we officially launched the Luxembourg Hub, which is led by Lux Innovation. We have a coordination team helping us, and the coordination team is made of a mix between public and private sector. We have 3 day one members of the ASBL, which are Luxembourgish companies. And then what I mean by the 12 indirectly, it's, in fact, according to the status of the GAIA-X ASBL, only one entity of a company is allowed to join the ASBL as a member. So 12 Luxembourgish companies are members through their headquarters or another entity. And then Luxembourg has a seat in the Governmental Advisory Board. And as the name tells it, the Governmental Advisory Board is there to advise the Board of Directors of the ASBL. Mr. Mario Grotz, Director General for Industry, Technology and Research at the Ministry of the Economy, is representing Luxembourg in this board. And for the last 2 points, we can be quite proud of it. In the different working group, we have 2 entities who has the lead. So the first one is the Luxembourg Institute of Health, who has the lead of the health working group. And then you have REA Space, but from Luxembourg, who are the co-founder of the Space Working Group, and they were helped there by EBRC. Next slide, please. So the GAIA-X initiative is supported by the Ministry of the Economy, and as I mentioned just before, is coordinated by Lux Innovation. In the strategy of the Ministry of the Economy that was published in June and called Wirtschaft für Morgen, you can read that the Luxembourg secured open cloud will be compatible with GAIA-X and will become a component of the GAIA-X compliant ecosystem. Regarding the National Data Exchange Platform, some of the challenges that we have to work on are the same as the ones covered by the GAIA-X initiative, and the platform should also be GAIA-X compliant. Then the Ministry of the Economy is also working on what is called the important project of common European interest on cloud infrastructure and services. And the idea here is to build a new European cloud, but a European multi-provider cloud edge continuum. You understand directly that we need here interoperability, security, and trust, and that the GAIA-X will be the basis of this. And finally, the last point, the Ministry of the Economy required some fundings for the next 4 years to cover projects related to GAIA-X, but we'll need to wait for the end of this year for the voting session. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for your attention. I have published under GAIA-X on the exhibitor page of the Swapcard platform some documents that might interest you. Otherwise, feel free to contact me per email or directly on Swapcard if you have any question or remark. And I'll be happy to provide you, or at least to try to provide you with an answer and to exchange longer about GAIA-X. Thank you again and enjoy the other speeches.